Hey, what's up YouTube? Leo Unitas here with Gotham Gaming. Today we're doing a World of Warcraft tutorial video about melee DPS fundamentals. My objective here is to help some people out who maybe they're struggling with DPS or just kind of learning, about the game and, learning how to get better at the game. This is the first of a series of videos I plan to make. So if you're into it, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're going to touch on three of the kind of major concepts of what your damage, how your damage actually becomes what it is. And then we're going to put an emphasis on some more of the nuanced things, kind of tips and tricks rather, that, I picked up over the years since vanilla, and maybe new players coming into the game just not aware of it yet, and maybe some veterans just never caught on to that. It is what it is. That being said, let's get right into the good stuff. And for your range players, I will have a video out for you in the very, very near future. All right, here we go. So what is good DPS and how do I do it? First things first, let's recognize the three major things that affect your character's damage. Your gear, your class and spec, and lastly, how you use your time in combat. So a lot of people say like, oh, if I had better gear, I would be doing more damage. And yeah, that's true. That's true. However, your gear only determines the minimum and maximum potential of your character. WoW is a numbers game full of RNG and things like trinkets and procs happen, but generally your gear, or rather your stats, are static. You can find out what the maximum potential of your character is if you run a sim. We're not getting into that. But know that if you put two people of different skill levels on the exact same character with the exact same gear, somebody's going to do more damage than the other. So being top DPS is not just a matter of gear. It's a matter of things like knowing your class and spec and using them properly. Knowing which ability you should be using at any given time is what separates good players from great players. Knowing what to do depending on the circumstances of the fight. Every fight's different. A lot of it's repetition and practice, and understanding your mastery and how certain mechanics of your class work together. That information you can find in class discords or on websites. Do your research about your class and practice a lot. Lastly, how you use your time. This is a really big concept. We're going to get a little bit more into this for our first major tip. Always be casting. Tip number one, always be casting. The number one thing that I commonly see when people are struggling with DPS is that they're not making good use of their time. It's really important to spend as much time casting your abilities as possible. If you're not using your abilities, then you're not doing damage. It's really important that you're always within range of your target. Melee range is 6 yards, and we'll take a look at that later. If you're moving too much from target to target, or in general, maybe you move the wrong way, or you're moving too much to avoid mechanics, that's going to contribute towards your downtime. If you have the wrong guy tab targeted on those AoE pulls, and you're looking at one guy, but you got another guy targeted, that's going to contribute towards your downtime. And lastly, things like button mashing your abilities that are still on cooldown, we're all doing it, that's contributing towards your downtime as well. All these little things over the course of a longer fight, if you're making these little mistakes here and there, they're all contributing towards your downtime. If you have, on a 2-minute fight, if you have, 5 seconds here or maybe 10 seconds there, all those little seconds actually add up to the greater part of what your damage is or isn't. I cannot stress enough how important each second is when you're trying to do DPS. Every second counts. Tip number 2, attack from behind. Another mistake I've been seeing a bit of recently is people standing in front of the target when they're trying to do melee DPS. And this is not where you should be standing. You want to be standing behind your target. And there's a couple of really good reasons for that. For one, Generally, standing in front of your target is not a safe place to be, as a lot of bosses do things like frontal AoE cone attacks that will possibly kill you, and dead DPS is no DPS. Two, attacking from the front also gives the boss a chance to block or parry your damage, which will reduce or completely negate it altogether. Sometimes mechanics happen that put you into less than optimal positioning, meaning that the only safe place to go is near the front of the boss, and that's okay. But otherwise, you should be returning to the back of the boss as soon as possible. There is an exception to this rule. There are certain bosses in the game, like Rawl in Waycrest Manor, who the only place to attack them is from the front, and that's okay because those bosses are designed to not be able to block or parry your damage. Tip number 3, time on target. As a melee DPS, you want to be spending every second possible in range of and attacking your target, which ties into our first tip of always be casting. Pretty simple concept, but easy mistake to make. Being a single yard outside of the target's hitbox means that your auto attacks aren't going off, you're not doing damage, you can't cast a lot of your abilities, and essentially you've added towards your downtime. You've lost time on your target. It's really easy mistake to make because of things like particle effects and spell effects, character model sizes. They can all be kind of distracting, and you look like you're standing next to the boss, but realize, unfortunately, that you're just barely outside their range. Clicking targets is more reliable to make sure that you are on the right target. Click on the nameplates if you have to. Sometimes tab targeting sends your target out in Narnia. It's the furthest target from you. You're like, why did I get that target? Oh my god. But point is, try to use your mouse clicks if you can when you have really big packs of mobs. It's more reliable. Make sure that you're using camera angles that are working for you so that you can see things. Certain angles are a little bit weird to work with. You want to make sure that your auto attacks are hitting at every moment possible. So stick to your targets back like glue. Time on target. Tip number 4, minimize unnecessary movement. We've kind of touched on this already when we talked about always be casting and time on target, but I just wanted to make sure to emphasize, minimize any unnecessary movements. Make sure that you're not spending too much time running from target to target. If you can, use your movement abilities to get back and forth from point A to point B so that you're minimizing any downtime that you have, because again, that downtime contributes towards damage that you just could have been doing but didn't end up doing it. Things especially to pay attention to are when you can remove abilities that would otherwise take you out of melee range. Rogues, for example, have things like Cloak of Shadows where you can just completely negate a mechanic and keep doing damage. Those are really big little things that you can do that are going to contribute towards dealing more damage. Paladins have their bubble. If you don't feel like you're going to need the bubble to stay alive, then sometimes you can just pop your bubble, stand in a mechanic, stand in the fire, and keep doing your damage. Death Knights have things like anti-magic shell, and so on and so forth. So those things actually contribute towards your uptime on the boss and minimize unnecessary movement. Tip number 5, hitboxes. Melee range is 6 yards. Wiki sites will tell you it's 5, but it was silent buffed in Legion to be 6 yards. Nobody knows why, but it is what it is. Knowing the size of your own hitboxes on your characters is especially helpful. Also, learning the boss's hitboxes is quite helpful as well when you're raiding. I wouldn't go out of my way to learn them. I would just get a feel for it as you're learning those bosses. It's important to learn those things, though, because when you have to run away from mechanics or whatnot, it's really good to know exactly how far you need to get back in to the fight to keep that uptime up and stay on the bosses and be hitting them. Also, hitboxes, knowing roughly the range of these things is important for certain boss mechanics, such as things on like Mithrax and Gahoon, where you have to maintain spacing from your teammates in order to avoid unnecessary damage. Your healers will appreciate it. Use add-ons like weak auras or deadly boss mods to help you manage your spacing. Slash range 6 or slash range 8 for DBM will bring up a little window for you to tell you who is within your proximity and how far they are. Learn the hitboxes. Most importantly, learn your own hitboxes. Tip number 6, resource management. So every role in the game has a different type of resource system. Tanks generally have to manage their cooldowns, such as their mitigations, where healers have mana pools, and if they misspend them, they run out of mana faster than they should. DPS, however, melee DPS specifically, generally has builder-spender systems. The simplest one being the warriors, who generate rage through auto attacks or certain abilities, and more complex ones are like rogues and DKs, who have runes or energy and combo points, or paladins with holy power, etc. Generally, they're builder-spender type of systems. And it's extremely, extremely important to master the use of your builder-spender rotations. You want to maximize, you want to micromanage it, you want to be as perfect with these resource systems as possible. Mismanaging them means you lose damage. If you're a warrior and you let your rage cap out at 100 and you lost rage that you could have been using because you didn't spend it fast enough and you hit the 100 mark, that's damage that was lost, because those are abilities that you were never able to cast because you didn't spend it efficiently. Sometimes it's going to happen where it caps out, and that's okay, but ideally avoid those situations at all costs. Tip number 7, cooldown usage. All right, for our final tip, let's talk about using your cooldowns. I'm sure everyone knows that you should be popping your cooldowns at the very start of a boss pull. This is generally one of the most fun times of the fight, and there's a couple reasons for this. Firstly, it is so that you can get as many cooldown uses during the fight as possible. You want to be using those cooldowns as soon as they come up, unless you're saving it for a bloodlust phase, for example, where you're kind of wanting to coordinate all those cooldowns together. But in general, you should be popping your cooldowns right at the beginning of the fight, and hopefully getting one more, maybe 2 more rotations of your cooldowns, depending on those bosses, for example. Another important reason why you're popping those cooldowns right off the bat is because your trinkets and enchants tend to have a higher chance to proc at the very beginning of the fight. There's some mathematics that go into that. Not guaranteed, but there's a higher chance for that. On top of that, make sure you're consuming your potion before combat starts, your pre-pot, as they call it. The reason is that you're only allowed to use one of those during combat. And if you pop it before combat starts, you still get the added benefit, and it doesn't count towards that pot during combat. All right. And with that being said, we're wrapping up our beginner melee DPS guide. If you liked our video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, go ahead and downvote it. Please give us some comments as well. Let us know what you liked and what we could do better. If you have any requests for videos, also leave that in the comment section as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.